What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel, this time for the conference championship. We have two games on tap, the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles, and of course the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. We're almost there towards the end, but we're here to break it all down for you. Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jack, creator of our lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy and multi-time short slate GPP winner. Jack, it's a bittersweet time because we have two games on tap that look really good, but it means we're closer to the end of the season.
Hey man, bittersweet indeed. This is the last one. I guess I'll be back with you one more video probably for the Super Bowl showdown FanDuel. But yeah, this is our last fun short slate leverage one, so we'll have to enjoy it.
Exactly. So what we're going to do in this video, if you've been watching our videos all season long and all playoffs long, you know exactly what we're going to do. But we'll go team by team to start talking about the injuries and interesting usage notes from the playoffs to help us on both the Classic and the two showdown slates. We will discuss our short slate strategies. There are 3 or 4 that we typically look at, and we can dive in depth into those about halfway through the show, and then we'll close it out with some specific showdown tips. Two very interesting showdown slates, two very different showdown slates. So if you're playing showdown on Sunday, make sure you stick around for that at the end. So Jack, let's not waste time. Let's jump into it and let's talk about this first game. First of all, we're in the DC area. People are buzzing. I don't think many people expected the Commanders to make it this far, but an exciting time nonetheless.
Yeah, and based on some of the injuries we see on the Philly side, they might actually have a decent shot here, right?
God, I know. Yeah, all the Commanders fans are normally Commanders fans are cautiously. I wouldn't even say optimistic. I think they're just straight pessimistic. But now they're straight up optimistic about this, which could be bad. But anyways, let's start on the Philly side, right? We looked at what happened last week. Their cornerback Quinyon Mitchell left the game early. He's fine. He's going to play. He's not on the injury report, which is good for their defense. Jalen Hurts, perhaps the biggest injury, hurt his knee last week and was clearly not himself when he returned to the game in the divisional round. He said he's going to wear a brace on his knee this week. I mean, he was extremely limited last week. I don't think we can expect him to be 100%. And Jack, they asked him about it this week. And normally, right, like if you're trying to hide something, right, you're like, I'm good to go. You know, I might wear a brace, but I'm straight. I'm good. I'm fine, right? He said, yeah, it's progressing. We'll see how it goes on Sunday, which like was not the most reassuring sentence about Hurts' health for Sunday.
Yeah, and I mean, someone that relies on the rushing that much, that's going to make him tough to play. And I mean, we've already seen how many times we play like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. They just run wind sprints. Barkley gets 40 touches. I guess we have to expect they're going to just try to run the ball a lot, right?
I mean, I would think so, but if Washington can keep up in this game, they have no choice but to throw. And maybe with a bum knee, maybe he's forced to throw more and not run as much. I mean, they were even shying away from the tush push last week because of his knee. I imagine he'll be a little bit better off this week, but still. And we'll talk about the ownership dynamic here in a second. But yeah, an interesting spot for Jalen Hurts with a bum knee. Now, his tight end, Dallas Goedert, caused some concern earlier in the week, wasn't practicing, but he is off the injury report. He is good to go. And two offensive line injuries, one for each team, one for Philly. Cam Jurgens, one of their top offensive linemen, he is expected to play according to Philly beat reporters and their sources. He only got in one limited practice, so we should expect him to play. A bigger injury, perhaps, Jack, is on the Washington side. Their offensive line, right guard Sam Cosmi, is out, so not the best time to lose an offensive lineman.
Yeah, I think Philly has the best non-blitzing pass rush in the league. Yeah, that'll be tough. What are your thoughts on just the fact that this is the third divisional matchup? I think you mentioned in the past that, divisional rematches sometimes are a little bit lower scoring. What are your general thoughts on? Does that change your approach for the game at all for the contest?
Yeah, I think it has to, right? We saw it even in Baltimore and Pittsburgh, their third matchup in the wild card round, a little bit lower scoring than people expected. And I think if you're looking to stack a game on this 2-game slate, I think most people will end up stacking the other game anyways, but it gives you more is more justifiable even if we expect this game to be even a little bit lower scoring because of the familiarity with each team. But we're missing out on some ownership if we some lowered ownership if we stack this first game. So there are pros and cons to playing that angle.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm with you. Like my first instinct was like, yeah, the late game, but then you look at these ownerships in this first game, and it's a little tempting.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the ownership when we get to the strategies of this slate and the lower owned plays. But I mean, let's just briefly talk about it, right? Jalen Hurts, the lowest projected owned quarterback. When have we ever seen Jalen Hurts 10 to 11% projected ownership on a 2 game slate? Probably never. And that is screaming to play him, and our model is on top of it too, Jack.
Yeah, that's what stuck out to me. I just saw like, whoa, highest owned or lowest owned quarterback, highest model quarterback. And we see AJ Brown getting some ownership, but Devontae Smith is like 15%.
Yeah.
I think Goddard is probably. I'm just looking. Yeah, I mean like 20-ish, so not super chalky. So yeah, I mean it's there. I mean let me ask you this: like, do you even have to format? Would you even have to play like three pass catchers and Hurts, or could you get away with just playing like Hurts, Barkley, a pass catcher, and like the defense or something, right? Or two, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that really works because Saquon Barkley, let's talk about him really quickly because his ownership is going to be truly unbelievable, right? I mean, it could be 90% in some contests, and if it's in smaller contests, he should be 100% based on the other running backs on this slate. So I think something like Hurts, Barkley, one of their receivers plus Goddard or the defense, I think is enough. I don't think you have to 4 or 5 man stack. In fact, that's probably not the best way to play it. I would say that's suboptimal to play 5 guys on this offense. But yes, how do we handle Saquon Barkley? Let's talk about him really quickly because there is, if we're looking on DraftKings, there is a $2,700 gap between Barkley and the next highest priced running back in James Cook. We look on FanDuel, that difference is 2,700 as well. So
Yep.
2,700
Yep.
on 2,700 on FanDuel, 1,700 on DraftKings, which is crazy.
I mean, I think as not to steal your thunder, but we'll just say there's another opportunity to get a little different with a different position on this slate, and I think it's probably not running back, Brian. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but like my instinct would be, I mean, you say match field, but when a guy is like 80% owned, like let's put it this way: for small field, are you just playing 100% Barkley?
Yeah, I think small field you have. It's no point, right? You play 100% Barkley, and if he fails, so does 95% of the rest of the field, and you're not really losing in that scenario. There is a conversation to be had to going underweight or only matching in large field, just if pricing shakes out weird, he doesn't ceiling, God forbid he gets hurt, then we're talking about pure chaos. And we've seen it, right, Jack? We saw 80% Tyreek Hill, obviously a more volatile position. He was 85% on what was deemed a can't miss spot. And he missed, and someone won a solo million on that 2 game slate. I believe it was a Monday night game last year. So, yes, he can miss, despite what the numbers may indicate. And I think for that reason, you cannot lock him in large field.
Yeah, it's tough when you deal with fading those kind of guys because it's almost like if he fails, the it's surprisingly hard to like figure out what the optimal is going to be, right? Like
True.
a lineup with like 7K left could win.
Right.
Some weird nonsense. It's almost like easier to build if you play him all the time. But yeah, I'm with you. I think you got to consider anytime you have a 90% on player on a multi-game any slate, you should consider ways to play it without him, just to at least in large field. But it's
And
tough.
And it is a primetime game, so I assume he'll just rush for 270-yard touchdowns once again. But we have to think, what if he doesn't? So,
What if he catches a 70-yard touchdown from
hey,
our 10% on quarterback?
no, it'll be
What if the injured quarterback is dumping the ball off to him a bunch?
no, it'll be Jalen Hurts getting injured, and then Tanner McKee coming in and dumping it off. All right,
Oh my God.
one more injury to discuss. Washington's defensive tackle Deron Payne is questionable. Hasn't practiced all week. I haven't seen any concern from the reporters that this would be extremely bad if you're on the fade Saquon Barkley train. So let's monitor his injury status over the next 24 hours. By the way, we are recording this on Saturday morning, so we don't have the Saturday inactives or the Saturday elevations just yet. Jack, I do want to talk about a potential edge here on this slate, and it's in the Washington wide receiver room. If we look last week, De'Ami Brown has just turned into Jerry Rice in the playoffs all of a sudden, and he actually ran more routes than Olamide Zaccheaus last week. But if you dive a little deeper, Olamide Zaccheaus actually injured his groin mid-game, missed a few snaps, and then came back in. So if you're just looking at pure opportunity and pure snaps, that's why De'Ami took the lead last week. I wouldn't expect him necessarily to do that this week once again, which gives us some ownership leverage on Zaccheaus, who was like half the ownership on both sites, and Lamade is not on the injury report this week, so he should be good to go. Obviously, the big difference is De'Ami Brown's been dynamic with his targets in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, Washington is kind of low owned here too. I mean, Jaden Daniels has been like a hugely popular play on a lot of slates, right? And he's like, at least on FanDuel, we have him basically a little bit lower than Mahomes, which for his upside and the way he's been playing is pretty low, I
Yeah.
think. And when you factor in what you just said, you've got a sub 10% ish pass catcher who's probably going to play a lot and get a lot of opportunity. I mean, and Zach Ertz is also pretty low. And so I think in general, just Washington, that seems like a clear way to go if you're going to play him like in a small field, that pivot. But it's just in general, I think I like the Washington side from an ownership standpoint.
Me too. And I think, as we just said, we wouldn't 5 or 6 man stack Philly in this game. I think you could on Washington's side. Yes, Daniels rushing is a big deal here, but they have enough cheaper pass catchers, and that's the biggest difference here, right? Their running backs are cheaper than Barkley. Their wide receivers as a whole are cheaper than Philly's receivers. They use more receivers. Philly is basically just A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Jahan Dotson as an afterthought. And then they have Zach Ertz, like you said. So I think you could 4 or 5 man Washington here, bring back Barkley and maybe one other Philly guy. And that may seem scary when you consider the other game. However, Jack, you look at this other game, which we'll talk about in a second. Like, would it shock anyone if Josh Allen just ran for all the touchdowns, or one of their random pass catchers caught one touchdown? And on the Chiefs side, it was just Kelsey. They have split backfields. Like, I could very easily see a 5-2 or a 5-1 Washington stack win with just one or two other players from the other game.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. The other one that sticks out to me from ownership standpoint is, I mean, I don't know what DraftKings is. Brian Robinson's like 10%. I mean, he got a lot of work last week. I just wanted to look. I think he actually runs a lot of routes too. It's just that's kind of shocking to me that he's so low. I mean, after Barkley, it's kind of like no man's land with. I guess James Cook is the one other sort of featured guy, but you've made the point in the past. Sometimes he gets randomly loses snaps to. I mean, he lost snaps to Ray Davis, right? He lost
Yes.
touchdown. He loses passing snaps to Ty Johnson. All these other backfields are split, so I just think that's again, it's not like an awesome play, but it sticks out to me as a guy with a lot of opportunity that's doing pretty well lately, and he's like super low owned.
Yeah, after his performance last week and looking at his price, my first thought was, oh, he should be pretty popular. But yeah, he's not eclipsing 20% really on either site. So yeah, I'm with it. Yes, he could get game scripted out really easily, but if they keep this close, they're going to feed Brian Robinson. So I like that call a lot, and he's another guy that you can include. And again, just as part of that game stack, Eckler runs routes, catches passes, gets touches too, and he's $300 cheaper. He's also in play. He'll be more popular than Brian Robinson, but I will say very, very flexible and lots of ways to play Washington stacks on this slate.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of random. Like, I can't actually find the routes for last week for Robinson. So I don't know if maybe he didn't run it. He probably did, but like 2 weeks ago, he had 5 targets. Eckler's 4. So it seems like it's not a lock that he's never gonna get run routes and catch passes.
For sure. Totally agree. One other note here, Jamison Crowder was the wide receiver for last week. This is super large field only, or I guess it's more showdown specific, but Jamison Crowder, the wide receiver for over Luke McCaffrey. And then randomly, John Bates, their number 2 tight end. He ran 14 routes last week. My first thought was, oh, that could be sneaky in showdown, but then the value is so bad on that showdown slate that his projected ownership is like over 20% as a really terrible play. And we'll talk about that showdown slate at the end, but that's a really bad showdown slate.
Yeah. Just and he'll catch one catch for 5 yards and touchdown inevitably. 50% owned in small field.
Yes, absolutely. Lock it in. So, all right, Jack, any other thoughts on this game before we move on to the second game?
Let's go to the fun one.
All right, Buffalo and Kansas City, the rematch that everyone has been waiting for. Pray for Bills fans out there. So, injuries. Buffalo dealing with some defensive injuries. Their corner, Christian Benford, dealing with concussion, got in 2 limited practices, and then was excused Friday for a personal issue. So I don't know how. I truly don't know how that plays into the concussion protocol. We'll find out today by 4 p.m. I imagine if he's out, obviously that's a big bump to Kansas City's wide receivers. I think he's tentatively expected to play according to the coaches. So let's monitor that. Bigger injury, starting safety Taylor Rapp is out. And according to the hashtag tape guys, he was important in their first meeting this year. So now they're starting a rookie in his place. So if you're looking for reasons to play Mahomes and their pass catchers, there's one. Kansas City, fully healthy, Jack. So first thought of this game is we have the most amount of wide receivers to play. Many of them will not contribute whatsoever, but it makes stacking really interesting and perhaps fun, but so many ways we can go about it.
Yeah, this is the one that I'm guessing for you. It's tough in small fields. Like, who do you pick, right? There's
Yeah.
just like if you're game stacking this game, like it's easier with 150 lineups. You just jam all of them in different combinations. So yeah, it's tough. I guess we have a little bit of separation on Kansas City in the sense that it's like Worthy, Kelsey, Brown in terms of routes, and then it's kind of everyone else. So that's a little helpful.
Yeah, that is true, right? Hollywood has been getting integrated more and more into this offense. DeAndre Hopkins, you and I hypothesized last week that maybe they were saving him for the playoffs. Not the case. Only ran 14 routes. Worthy 30, Kelsey 27, Marquise Brown 25, Noah Gray 16, even Juju ran 13 routes. So really a hodgepodge of guys behind the top couple. Peyton Hendershot, shout out preseason, ran 6 routes. Justin Watson only ran 3 routes. So yeah, I mean you're gonna mix those guys into your large field, but again, it's not that great. But I think the biggest thing here, Jack, is the pricing is relatively soft. Right? It's not like we need to fit in these guys in small field GPPs. We don't need these 3,500 players. A lot of the number one targets and some of the running backs are pretty cheap, and it's really not that difficult. And as you alluded to earlier, that leads to us to being able to leave salary in larger contests. But if you reverse engineer that, that means it's really easy to play small field contests without playing trash players.
Yeah, you can play like actual players without having to, you can use all salary or leave a little bit, whatever. What do we think about the Buffalo side? I mean, the routes you have here are pretty flat, right? It's like they're just truly rotating everyone behind Shakir.
Shakir 20 routes last week, Keon Coleman 15, Dawson Knox 14, Dalton Kincaid 13, Amari Cooper 12, Curtis Samuel 11, Matt Collins 10. Like it doesn't get any more balanced than that. And yes, all of them aside from Shakir and Kincaid will be low owned. Will they catch any passes? Fingers crossed. We saw Curtis Samuel catch a long one. We've seen Matt Collins catch touchdowns before. Amari Cooper, you got to think they unleash him at some point. They traded for him for a reason. I don't know what's going on there. He can't run more than 14 routes a game. You have the tight ends. Keon Coleman always ripe for a big play, I guess. But that's the problem. It's like all these things could happen. They're not likely to happen, but they're all extremely low owned.
Yeah, I mean I think the one saving grace for doing these Buffalo guys is that I'm just looking, their average depth of target is pretty good for all like almost all these like trash receivers. They're all like over 10-yard A dot. So like they literally just need to catch like one 30-yard touchdown and they're good, right? It's not like they're like running routes to catch for 2 yards and you need them to get a bunch of opportunities. So it's gross. But it is a way to play Josh Allen and get different if you're, playing Barkley, like using all the salary. So it's out there. It's always out there. Doesn't often work, but it's there.
Yeah, that is true, and it's especially good in Showdown again, which we'll talk about at the end.
Yep.
What do you make of these Kansas City running backs? Right, Kareem Hunt has seemingly been the lead guy at least last couple of weeks, and he took the lead last week in their first playoff game. We look at snaps; it was Kareem Hunt 24, Isaiah Pacheco 16. We look at carries as 8-5 in favor of Kareem Hunt, and we look at routes; it was in favor of Hunt 12-9. So Hunt, the clear guy here, $200 more expensive, yet the lower owned guy, which is crazy to me. I don't know if it's actually going to shake out that way, but according to our projected ownership, and we look at a lot of different things, we expect Pacheco to be more popular, which doesn't seem right.
I have just been every week playing the lower owned of the two, and it seems to work every week because it keep like whichever one's lower owned seems to do something. So I'm probably like just gonna focus more on Hunt. Like you said, he's just looks like he's getting the better. I think at this point, even if Hunt was more popular, it seems like he's the guy right now. So I'd probably just play it. And it's just a nice lucky thing that he happens to be lower owned for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. And again, these aren't guys that are like putting up tons and tons of points in this offense. But if we can get 8 to 10 points, that could be enough on this slate. So I think you have to mix both of them in. And you mentioned the Buffalo running back situation. Obviously, in the wild card round, it was extremely split as they were leading Denver pretty significantly. Last week in a more competitive game, James Cook got 32 snaps to Ty Johnson's 21. James Cook 17 carries to 5 carries for Ty Johnson, 12 routes to 9 in favor of James Cook. Even Ray Davis got a few touches, got that goal line touch. So, are you mixing in Ty Johnson in large field? Are you mixing in Ray Davis in large field?
I think you can. I don't know if I will. I think those are probably guys you got to be careful with, like not leaving a bunch of salary with. I would think. I mean, maybe Ty Johnson if he catches a bomb touchdown again, but like Ray Davis, like you shouldn't be thinking he's going to outscore, James Cook or something, right? So I think they're in play. I don't love it, but I don't know if we need to get there, as we'll probably talk about when we talk about the wide receivers. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, Ty Johnson is one because he runs routes. Ray Davis is purely a short yardage guy, garbage time guy at this point in his career. So yeah, I think Ray Davis you don't have to. Showdown's a different story, but Ty Johnson I think I would include just because he is pretty cheap, and if something happens where he scores somewhat similarly to James Cook, that's price savings will be a big difference. So, any other thoughts on this game before we talk about the actual strategies for the two gamer?
Oh, let's get into it.
All right, so as you know, you've been watching these videos all season long, and many of you have been watching for years now. Leaving salary on the table, playing low-owned players, mega stacking, playing tons of guys from one game, all are viable strategies on any showdown, on any short slate, 2, 3, 4 games. They are especially viable this week, and all of them look pretty good. But I think, Jack, the biggest edge is probably leaving salary on the table. You look at the pricing gap. We talked about Saquon Barkley. We talked about the receivers a little bit. You look at the quarterbacks, right? There is a $1,500 pricing gap on DraftKings between Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, so that's an opportunity. And you look at the pricing gap on FanDuel, it's only $1,000, $8,700 to $7,700, but that is a $1,000 to $1,500 depending on the site you're playing on. Edge, right? I think it's really quickly, Jack. It's fair to say that any quarterback could be the highest scoring on the slate, right?
Read my mind. Yeah, I was just gonna say that's a big. That's like one of the first questions you ask yourself when you're talking about leaving salaries. Like, can any of the quarterbacks win? And yes, clearly.
Yeah, and we don't have a Russ Wilson type of guy on the slate. Yes, all these no DeVito rule because we actually have 4 good quarterbacks here, 4 good fantasy quarterbacks as well. So the other crazy thing, I don't know if I've ever seen this, but there's no wide receiver priced over $6,800 on DraftKings, which is insane. FanDuel, we have a little bit different. AJ Brown, they got him up at 82, McLaurin 79. So they price these guys a little more appropriately just based on the slate dynamics. But you look at DraftKings, right? We've mentioned it before we started recording. AJ Brown could go 3 points, and he's the most expensive receiver, only at $6,800. So the wide receiver pricing in itself lends you to leave salary on the table because any receiver that has a real role could be the highest scoring on the slate.
Yeah, I mean, literally every single receiver on this slate could score has like very low floor. We don't have like the Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, where it's like, yeah, they might not be optimal, but they're still going to score like 10 points. Like literally, AJ Brown, we've seen him score like 1 point. I mean, maybe McLaurin would be I don't know, maybe my pick for the highest floor, but even he's kind of a boom bust, like deep threat. I mean, Worthy doesn't run 50 routes. Shakir, Smith. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think every single one of these guys could get a 0, and it wouldn't shock us, which means you can play a lot of combinations of receivers that leave salary and win.
Like, would it shock anyone if Worthy, De'Ami Brown, and Devontae Smith were the 3 optimal receivers? No, and that alone is like you could leave so much salary on the table. You can still play Barkley, you can play all these other guys. So I guess let's talk about it because people ask us all the time: how much can they leave? How do we go about this if we're hand building? I'll talk about a hand building maybe, and maybe you talk about it at large field. How do we go about this? Because there's so many options, there's so much salary we could leave. What is the optimal approach here? Because I do think it is probably the biggest edge on this slate.
Yeah, I mean, I think for large field, like I would start by, like I think you said it last week. You set a pretty low minimum salary, and then you go through all of the we'll say the secondary players that have more limited upside, and you ask yourself, all right, who can this guy outscore? And then you can set the special salary rule to make sure that when that guy's in the lineup, you're not leaving like 5K. And then the final step, of course, is like go look at the lineups with extra salary and just make sure you didn't miss anything. So I think maybe if you start with sort of like I don't know, Hollywood, Smith, Shakir, Worthy, McLaurin, Brown, like those are even Zacchaeus and Brown. Like you could probably leave any amount because those guys could be the highest scorer, right? And then you start getting into like Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, if you're going that deep. Like those are the kind of guys where it's like, all right, I don't want to leave like 5K on the table with them. So that's how I'd approach the large field.
And just really quickly, for those, we have a lot of people who watch our shows are big football fans. They know all the names. But if you're someone who, like, you play a lot of DFS, but maybe football is not your sport, or you don't watch that much football, and you don't know these guys intimately, how would you said to yourself, can this guy outscore this other guy? If you're not that familiar with the names, what would be your advice to people? Hey, this is how you can tell if this guy could outscore this guy.
I mean, you can look at the model for sure, right? Like we have Devontae Smith and up, and then below him there's a gap, right? And I think that's reflected in the routes that you listed off. And then you can also just look at ownership, right? You can say like, okay, let's say when I'm using a popular guy, he's probably better and
Yeah.
more upside. If I'm using a 5% owned guy, he's probably doesn't have that. He's probably not that good. So what is that? Was that hit? What you were thinking?
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking. That's great. That's why you're the brains on this show because that's a very easy
I'm not
way
the
to
brain.
do to do this. All right, and then running backs. Barkley, right? Like, okay, in lineups that fade Barkley, do we necessarily have to leave, or do we? Because on FanDuel, right, $2,700, that you can leave 2,600 and below and be fine with Barkley. It's when you leave 2,700 and more and leave out Barkley, that's when it gets kind of shaky because he truly has to fail in that scenario. But we talk about many times on short slates guys getting priced out because the pricing is so soft, especially on DraftKings. Right, I think it's harder for Barkley to get priced out with a 10-point performance or a 15-point performance compared to another slate with more expensive guys.
Yeah, I mean, he basically probably has to get hurt to not work. I would think there's such a narrow range of lineups where like he does decently well, like you said, and isn't and it gets priced out. I would think if you're gonna fade him, you just want to build very optimally, which means like play high owned guys. Don't play the guys that are only getting 10. Like play the popular, highest model owned plays if you're not gonna play him because he's gonna be so highly owned that like it's like we talk about in Showdown. Like you don't need to have you can make like the one big pivot, right? Like the one lone captain. You just build optimally around it. You don't need like too much chaos. Now, yes, could a pure chaos lineup win? Yes, but it's just, I mean, yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. Let me ask you this because, excuse me, as we're talking about leaving salary, and as we'll talk about the next strategy, playing low-owned players. If you're not a fan of many of these low-owned players, or the way you're building or the way your lineups are shaking out don't include many low-owned players, you can leave more salary, and that's your differentiator. So I think, Jack, we should let people know that, especially in smaller contests, if you want to play all the popular guys, you really like all the popular plays this week, just leave a little bit more salary, 500, 1,000, maybe 1,500. It's possible on this slate. And then you could play all the popular guys because even though individually they're popular, that construction won't be popular in and of itself.
Yeah, what's your experience with that? Like, if you just even leave like 500, is that already like pretty unique? Like, everyone's just literally trying to use like every dollar for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, you have to be careful about playing like literally the most popular guys at every position and leaving $500. But if you play a couple 20 to 30% guys, you have no problem leaving $500. But again, on this slate, especially if you're mega stacking, in addition to it, right, you can play all the good guys and maybe not every single 50% plus, maybe all but one or two, and leave 500. But I think you could play because of the wide receiver situation. You can leave 1,000 to 1,500 on both sites, and it looks really bad. But on this slate, it's actually good.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if because the pricing is so soft, you're probably going to see less full game stacking
Yep.
just because people are going to be playing like the few guys that do use up the salary. So I think the similar to what you're saying, if you want to play all the chalky players, playing them in like a full game stack, especially in small field, I think is probably more unique this week than it would be because the pricing is so soft.
I mean, yeah, that's said perfectly, and I agree. So once you mega stack and include the popular plays, no one's really doing that. Add in leaving salary, and you're playing all the best plays in a way that no one else is doing it, which is probably the best thing you could possibly ask for at this point in the season. All right, let's talk about low owned plays now at each position as we move on here. The only low owned quarterback is Jalen Hurts. Gut thought: 10% ownership. Do you double the field? And if you're making multiple lineups, play 20%. Do you go heavier? Do you fade him? What are your thoughts?
I think I'm in for the double.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you got to try it. It's he's injured. He's probably gonna hit the ball 50 times. I mean, for large field, I think you got to try. Just because of the like. I mean, you made the point that like they don't have trash plays, but I think that works to our advantage here with a low owned quarterback. We don't have to play a bunch of lineups to get all the different combos. You just
Yes.
literally play him with like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goddard, Barkley, defense. That's it, right?
Actual
Like
good
that's
players. Actual good players to
yeah,
play with them.
that's already unique. Like you don't even have to four-man stack Philly. You could just three-man stack them because they're so low. Yeah, that's why I'm in. Is it's just very easy to build like 20 to 30 lineups with him that are good.
Totally agree. We look at the running backs, and again, this is normally we have different low owned guys on different sites. It's across the board pretty similar this week. At running back, it's Brian Robinson for Washington. It is Kareem Hunt for Kansas City. And again, maybe this gets flipped. It doesn't seem like it this early in our ownership. And then Ty Johnson, who we mentioned as a trashier low owned play. But specifically, Brian Robinson, Kareem Hunt, you and I are both big fans of this week at their ownership.
Yeah, just play. It's finally we get a slate where one of the Kansas City guys isn't like 50% out. Like they're both pretty reasonable. And yeah, I think like you said, Ty Johnson still like super cheap on DraftKings?
Yeah, 4,400 on DraftKings.
Yeah, I mean that just seems like for pass catching upside with that at low ownership is a no-brainer. Any other trashy running backs here like Davis? That's
Again,
pretty thin.
yeah, I don't think I'm. Well, here's the one question I did want to ask you. Right? Are we playing Gainwell in lineups where we don't play Saquon Barkley? Like for
That is an interesting
the pure
take.
chaos. Like if you're gonna not play Barkley in some lineups, you have to include Gainwell. I don't know if you play them both together, but I think you could. You know, obviously you're hinging on the fact that Barkley leaves the game for any period of time, and then you capture the pure benefit of that if Gainwell benefits from it.
That makes some sense to me. I guess you probably almost have to leave salary if you're playing a 4,800 running back without
Yeah.
Barkley. But yeah, no, I can see that.
Yeah, and I think the way to do that, guys, is if you're using our lineup builder or any optimizer, you include Kenneth Gainwell in your player pool, and you make a rule: do not include Barkley and Gainwell in the same lineup because I don't. Maybe there's a way they both get there. I don't think there is because Gainwell doesn't get that many touches outright. So
Yeah.
just include them both and then exclude them from the same lineups. All right, wide receiver Devonta Smith, low owned, more so on FanDuel. He's actually under 20% on FanDuel. He's right around that mark on DraftKings. Basically, all the secondary Buffalo receivers in Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper, Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, they're all low owned. DeAndre Hopkins, who can't seem to run more than 15 routes, got the Amari Cooper syndrome with that. He's low owned. And then Zacchaeus, who we talked about for Washington. So this is definitely the grosser section, Jack, because these are guys that just haven't been getting many targets, haven't been running many routes outside of Devonta Smith. Obviously, we like the Zacchaeus angle, but it's really the Buffalo guys that. I mean, if you have us, if you're playing multiple lineups, you rotate them through. Sure, I get it. But you're playing small field or making a single entry, it's really tough to click on any of those guys with any conviction.
Yeah, I think like you said it before. You can play like the the best wide receiver plays are not that good this week, but you can play the best ones and still leave a little salary to get unique. But you're not playing like a trashy guy that's gonna get a zero more than likely.
Yeah, and I'm gonna assume you have no favorite of those Buffalo guys after Shakir, right? It's just all crapshoot.
I do not have a crystal ball, and I do not know which one will get the random 30-yard touchdown from Josh Allen, but maybe, hopefully one, right? Hopefully one.
Please. And yeah, well, again, we'll talk about it here in a second as we close out the show with Showdown even more viable in Showdown. And at tight end, no one's really under 20%. Zach Ertz is close, and Dallas Goedert is close. People want to play Kelsey, surprisingly, but they also want to play Dalton Kincaid at his price tag. And opportunity, by the way, Jack, has not been that much different for Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. $1,000 price difference and a massive ownership difference. Showdown, especially, it's great, but even on the two gamer, Kincaid should not be that much more popular than Dawson Knox.
Yeah, it shocked me. They almost like split snap counts and routes, and yeah, I mean he's definitely in play, and I think here's a question: like, do you allow two tight ends this week, and then like would you set a rule with Knox to like not be able to upgrade to Kelsey, right? Like, would you think he could outscore Kelsey, or would you build more? I would think probably not, just
Yeah.
because he's gonna be so low owned. You just play optimally. You just try to use all the salary, play Barkley, whatever
Yep. I
with
agree.
him.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he can outscore Kelsey, Knox, that is. So, yeah, I would put some salary rules in place. Definitely a two tight end week. Generally, the times you want to play two tight ends are when pricing is really tight and you need two, 3K type of tight ends or at least one to fit in, or when wide receivers are weak, which is this week. Wide receivers are extremely weak, so very easy to see how Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, Travis Kelsey, one of the Buffalo tight ends, outscore multiple more than half the receivers on this slate. So yeah, I think a very good two tight end slate, especially in smaller contests.
I'm almost gonna say it's unique this week to play two times. I'm just looking at our ownership. It's basically 100% the
Hmm.
tight ends, which means like the field is not playing it. So I'd almost think like maybe in a small field that's enough. You just be like, hey, I'm just gonna play two tight ends that aren't, like, and that's automatically people aren't doing that. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
The only downside to that is a lot of sim tools, for whatever reason, just jam in double tight end at any
Okay.
opportunity. So I think if you're playing higher dollar stuff, there's a good chance that we'll see double tight end just because that's what simulators push out all the time. So if you're playing less than $3 contest small field, do it to your heart desires. You're playing higher dollar stuff where people are more likely to use simulation tools. I don't think it'll be as unique.
Fair enough. But anyway, it's a good play whether or not it's a unique play
Yes,
this week.
yes,
Double tight end.
100%. Exactly. And finally, mega stacking. I think we've talked about different ways, right? We both really like the Washington idea. Philly, 3-4 guys. Buffalo, Kansas City. I guess here's the question: if we're stacking Buffalo, if we're stacking Kansas City, are we just including one in large field of the Mac Hollins type group, the DeAndre Hopkins group? Are we using two? I assume not. I assume it's just one of those guys plus Shakir plus Cook plus tight ends. Um, how crazy do we have to get if we're playing 5, 6 Buffalo or Kansas City players?
I'm with you. I don't think you have to get that crazy. I think you just one max one, right? And there's like we said, there's a lot of lineups you could build without any of the trash guys by just leaving a little bit of salary. And I'd even dare say like some 4-2s will be pretty unique, even if they're all pretty popular guys, just because the pricing is soft. People are going to play like on FanDuel, right? Like AJ Brown is projected at like 50% owned. He hasn't done anything, but the pricing is soft and he fills the salary, so like people are going to play him.
Yep, exactly. All right. Really quickly, people always ask about which defense do I play, and again, we don't have a crystal ball. It's really tough because pricing is soft and because spreads are relatively tight. Ownership is kind of spread out on defense. No one's going to be like 10% owned. The lowest owned will be the underdogs, the Commanders, and the Bills. But again, it's not that crazy. Jack, I think it says play whatever fits, whatever makes sense to your lineup. If you're playing multiple lineups, try to get equal exposure. I don't have a better answer than that.
Yeah, and I would just say, sometimes we talk about like playing defenses against quarterbacks. Like you always can, right, on a two gamer, but I think we've talked about enough other that's more of a uniqueness play. It's not like an optimal play. So I think we've talked about enough good ways to get unique that you probably don't need to go out of your way to do that this week, right?
Yeah, and I would say even like you look at these quarterbacks on the slate: Mahomes, Allen, Daniels, Hurts. Like they're not good fantasy quarterbacks to play defenses against. Like all season long, they don't give up many turnovers. They lead proficient offenses. They don't take that many sacks. So I would prefer to play a quarterback and then hope that the other game is lower scoring and play the defense from that game. Again, like you said, I love playing it on 2 game slates. I don't know if it's necessarily that I would allow it, but I wouldn't specifically target it this week.
Yep, I'm with you.
All right, let's finish up here with some showdown specific thoughts here. And again, if you're not subscribed to the channel already, make sure you do so. It's free. Just click subscribe. One, it supports the channel, helps us continue to make videos. We're doing videos for all sports. Two, you'll get notified when all of our Super Bowl content is released, so it's mutually beneficial. So click that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you like the content, what you've seen all playoffs long. Jack, one quick showdown note, as we see every single time. The underdog kickers are pretty much always lower owned, and I don't necessarily think that should be the case in these games. Both these underdogs are both these well, especially in Washington game, right? Like Jake Elliott one sucks and they go for more fourth downs. I think Zane Gonzalez is a better play than Jake Elliott and will probably be lower owned. But in general, we see kickers as underdogs lower owned. Like every projection system just takes the Vegas odds and then translates that to kicker points, which we know is not the right way to do it.
No, definitely not. I mean, has the spread even moved that much in this Philly game with like the Hurts
I honestly, you know
three?
what? People tune in for our expert advice, and I haven't even checked, so I don't even know. So,
Well, I'm looking at. I always just look at Fantasy Labs, and it seems wrong because it says Washington opened as a 5-point favorite, which does not that does not seem correct.
yep, and that's why we don't use
I'm gonna check
fantasy
the
labs.
Occupy. Yeah, no, I'm gonna check the Occupy one while you're talking.
Okay.
I'm curious.
All right.
To
So
your point, like if the spread has not moved, that means the projection systems are not going to pick up on the fact that like Washington's a better play than maybe they're getting credit for, right?
yeah, exactly. So if we start with this first game, the grosser of the 2 games, Washington and Philly, builds will be balanced on both sites, meaning 3 Philly guys, 3 Washington guys, 3-2 on FanDuel. Obviously, Saquon is going to be the mega owned captain MVP on both sides. Extreme outrageous ownership. Jaden Daniels comes in next, and as we mentioned on the classic slate, that means Jalen Hurts is going to be pretty low owned, which is pretty rare for a Philadelphia showdown slate. And again, Jack, like the classic slate, everyone wants to jam Daniels, Hurts, and Daniels in showdown, which means the Eagles wide receivers get squeezed on ownership. We know how this plays out, but we will get stud wide receivers at low ownership in showdown.
Yeah, I mean FanDuel is just literally you're gonna have three guys take up almost 100% of the MVP. I mean it's tough. It's tough, man. I mean like what are the odds that McLaurin outscores all three of those guys? It's not great. And then I mean like we talked about I think on the two gamer that the trash plays are not that good for these teams. Zacchaeus is low owned on the two gamer, but on the showdown, I mean, yeah, he's not going to be like 50% owned, but he's not like a trash play. He's going to get some ownership. The Eagles, we've been down this road how many times with them? They just don't involve the secondary guys. Tough one, man. Are you even going to play this one?
I mean, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I probably will play it. But it's really gross, right? Basically, what the optimal and what the field will do is play as many of the studs as you can, and then just play trash plays. And as we know, when that happens, if the trash plays don't hit, and even if they do hit, it's a lot of competition for very similar lineups. I would much prefer on DraftKings to play a mid-range captain like Ertz or Goddard or Brian Robinson or any of the guys we've talked about so far, De'Ami Brown even, and then fit in one more extra stud that way as opposed to playing an extra trash play. Or you go with Jamison Crowder, Zacchaeus, the Washington guys who we think could be leveraged. But again, pretty tough showdown slate overall. I assume you're not going to play it on FanDuel?
I don't think so. The prizes are not that good. It's yeah. I mean, the second game is way better. So yeah, I think I'm out on this one.
Yeah, the second game is way better. Field is building slightly Kansas City heavy. The field has had enough, Jack, of the Buffalo guys. They're just going to play the Kansas City values. They're not going to try to pick which of the four receivers to play, which means we actually get some decent leverage. Fingers crossed, one of them catches a touchdown, which seems to be the theme of the slate. But we could play Josh Allen at lower than usual MVP or captain ownership and have a variety of low owned plays to pair with them. Those are the types of games we like to play stud quarterbacks when we have so many ways to get different in the flex.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the most glutton for punishment. I'm playing bad MVPs. I played Tim Patrick as an MVP before. I've never lived that one down. But I've won with those. It's never been easier to play like Josh Allen. I think at MVP on this slate, like the top three wide receiver ownerships are all outside Shakir are all Kansas City. Every other, the Coleman, Cooper, Samuel, Collins are all under 12%. Dawson Knox is 6%, which that's Dawson Knox is a great example of that classic like DraftKings FanDuel dynamic where he's like probably fairly popular on DraftKings because he's super cheap, but on FanDuel he's going to be so you literally have five trash quote unquote pass catchers to play with Josh Allen on FanDuel to get different. I just think that's such an obvious way to play.
And maybe even six, right? Because Kincaid's $9,500. He's sandwiched around right below Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. So he'll go lower
Yep.
owned on FanDuel as well. You compare that to DraftKings, and this is where the pricing gets different. For whatever reason, Kincaid and maybe DraftKings is like we've seen the difference between Kincaid and Knox. Kincaid is only $3,600. Knox is $1,600. Both these guys will be popular, but Kincaid is going to be by far the most popular value. And if you don't expect him to play much more or get much more opportunity than last week, that's a great fade opportunity. And there's so many guys, unlike the first game, that can outscore Dalton Kincaid at $3,600. I have no problem playing stars and scrubs over here with the variety of guys we have to play. So, yeah, the other pricing note really quickly is the Kansas City running backs on DraftKings. Hunt is 7K, Pacheco is 6,600. But you look on FanDuel, Hunt is 11.5, and Pacheco is 8K. So a much bigger difference depending on the site you're playing on between those Kansas City running backs.
Yeah, and that'll keep Hunt's ownership in check, probably, right? Like we've talked about, he's the better play this week, and we've seen on the two gamer and then on this FanDuel showdown. For whatever reason, they're not super popular. So that's in play too. And of course, inevitably, Travis Kelce is going to be 75% owned and catch 2 touchdowns. But I mean, you can play him and flex with Josh Allen, and we've had ways to be unique here. Yeah, man, I don't know. This is a good one.
Yeah, it's a classic showdown slate that we love to see. Normally, we get two stud teams like this. It's really difficult to play showdown, as we see in the first game. But this game is actually really good for showdown. So save some of your bankroll allocation for this game. And if you're not that big on two gamers, play most of your allocation in this game. So, all right.
All right, let me ask you this: I don't know how often you do. I think you mentioned you like to play mid-range captains. Like, I'm assuming you're going to play this game on DraftKings. Are you going to look heavily at just playing like Josh Allen at captain here?
I think I will because you look at the mid-range captains here. It's Hollywood. It's the kickers. It's nothing. It's so bad. I forgot to include Buffalo guys here. Let me see. Hold on. So if we look at 6K and below, which I would deem mid-range, it's Amari Cooper, no. Hollywood Brown, maybe. Kickers, Keon Coleman, no. Defenses, no. Kincaid, I'm not going to play the super cheap, popular guy at captain. Yeah, it's bad. I would just rather play the studs here and very, very different from the first game.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Cool. All right, guys, that'll do it. Remember, our daily plug is already up on the site, occupyfantasy.com. Our writers, Chris and Bismo, went through the rankings, in-depth slate notes, lineup construction tips for different contest sites, for different sites in different contests. So make sure you go check that out. It's already up. Our Occupy model, which we've referenced many times in this show, is up, ranking players on DraftKings and FanDuel with Jack and I's projected ownership for both of the slates as well as Showdown. and our lineup builder that we've been talking about that Jack created. We're going to use it to build our lineups tomorrow, and you should too. OccupyFantasy.com/lineup builder. Go check it out. And I think that's it. Jack, appreciate you taking the time to do this video.
Yep. Let's enjoy it. Last one. As always, don't forget to late swap. You can watch our other videos and we talk about that more. You got about 30 minutes or so between games, I think.
Absolutely. So for Jack, I'm Brian. Thank you everyone for listening. If you have any questions, by the way, you can join our Discord or comment on the video below. We always love to hear. And again, we're recording this Saturday morning. If you guys see any updates that we missed, drop a comment below. So for Jack, I'm Brian. Thanks. Good luck and enjoy the conference championship games.